Hey everyone! In this video, I'm going to give you some advice that I wish someone would have given me when I first started teaching. How to succeed on the first day of class. But before we get started, here's a quick giggle to help you loosen up. A student says to his teacher, "Teacher, I don't think I deserved a 0 on this test." The teacher replies, "I agree, but that's the lowest mark I could give you." This video will be broken into 2 parts. In part 1, we're going to talk about how students are astute at assessing the absence of effective structure. They can tell whether their teachers are proactive or reactive, whether they are old pros or rookies. In this video, I'm going to give you some of my best techniques that will help you go from green to gold in as short a time as possible. The first thing to understand is that the rules in any classroom are defined by reality. Students will look and see. Whatever any student can get away with, all students can get away with. When I first began teaching, I thought, oh my, these students are evil, or these students are bad. But I quickly realized that much of the management in a typical classroom is by default. Students fool around because the teacher has not structured anything better for them to do. And this structure, which leads to success, begins before and as the students enter the classroom. Now, I remember my first day teaching. I was green as grass. I had my rules, and I thought the students would follow them to the letter. I was wrong. Teachers love to tell students about their rules, and in some classrooms, the teacher's desires actually become implemented. But in most classrooms, they don't. Students know that words are cheap and actions are expensive. The real rules in any classroom are defined by reality, by what the teacher allows. So students are always watching. If, for example, you ask the class to pay attention while you are speaking, but you fail to deal effectively with side conversations, students know that paying attention is optional. You have to have students not only listen to what you say, but watch what you do. If those two are not in alignment, students will see you as not only hypocritical, but weak-willed and unable to follow through on what you say. Classroom rules are ultimately defined by whatever any student can get away with. So the students just watch. Everything you do is a lesson. And you will have taught a half-dozen lessons by the time the first period begins. The very first lesson of your career is how the first student of the first period enters your class. Imagine that you have 10-15 minutes before the bell rings for first period. The first student enters your classroom. You have just taught the first lesson of the school year. Now you might ask yourself, huh? What was the lesson here? The lesson was, you may enter my class however you wish. How does the student know this? Because he or she just did it. Remember, your rules are defined by reality. There was no greeting, no communication of expectations, nothing specific to do. Since you have advocated structuring the situation, structure is left to the student. And when you leave structure up to the student, don't be surprised that the students come strolling into your classroom, joking, laughing, pushing each other, fighting. You asked for it. As strange as it seems, you can't expect students to know how you want anything done. They're not mind readers. What their other homeroom teachers or subject teachers may have allowed might be totally out of whack with what you want. And much of the management in a typical classroom is just done by default, left to the students. And students fool around because the teacher has not structured anything better for them to do. Okay, now imagine that a few more minutes have passed, but the bell has still not rung, and a second student enters the classroom. You now have 2 students in your classroom. What do you think they'll do? Hey, Brian, Where have you been? Hanging out. I heard you were out of town. Nah, just for a week. Say, I hear you're going out with Sharon again. Big surprise. They're socializing. You have just taught the second lesson of the school year. After you enter my classroom, you may socialize. The kids have important events to catch up on. Do you have anything important for them to do? Now it's 10 minutes before the bell rings. 8 kids are in the classroom, standing around, talking and laughing. Now it's 5 minutes before the bell rings. 20 kids are in the classroom, standing around, talking and laughing. It's 1 minute before the bell rings. Everybody is standing around, talking and laughing. Now that you have allowed this gabfest to start, how will you stop it? It is much easier to manage and control one student at a time than it is a group of 20, 25, or 30. If you give students nothing to do, they'll do what comes most natural. Talk. While all this talking is going on, you suddenly hear, ding, the 8 o'clock bell rings. You've just taught your third lesson of the year. Don't even think about being in your seat when the bell rings. Why should they worry about it? You don't. There is no routine to get the students seated and ready to work before the bell rings, is there? Do not expect the students to take classroom structure more seriously than you do. If you don't care, neither will they. Since the students are not in their seats when the bell rings, how will you get them there? Class, the bell has rung. Let's all take our seats. We have a lot to cover today, so let's get started. Everybody, let's take our seats. The students have just observed your first overt act of classroom management. But what classroom management technique did they see? It was the most widespread management technique in the world. Nag, nag, nag. And you have just taught the fourth lesson of the school year. In order to get you to do things, I nag. While nagging may be the most widespread technique in the world, it is also one of the least effective. Most students learned to tune it out before they were out of diapers. I'm married and I have 2 young kids, and I can tell you, from experience, nagging doesn't work. Now it's time for students to teach you a lesson. Students like brief, short, tiny little lessons with great, big, long breaks in between. As such, no matter how much time you give the students for a lesson transition, it will never be long enough. If you give students 3 minutes, they'll need 5. If you give them 5 minutes, they'll need 7. Students know how to stretch a break, and they know how to do so by dawdling. So, when you tell the class to take their seats, 3 students interpret this to mean, now is a good time to sharpen pencils. And where does this leave you? You might respond by saying, hey, those of you over at the pencil sharpener, come on, please take your seats. You had plenty of time to sharpen your pencils before school. Come on, just find a seat so we can get started. You have just taught the 5th lesson of the school year. If nagging doesn't work, I will nag you some more. How are you going to get those students into their chairs? You might say, everyone, just find a seat and sit down. Are you kidding? You just gave away the furniture. The 6th lesson of the school year is, you may sit wherever you want. Now imagine the biggest troublemaker in your class, the one who will cause you to question your career choice. Let's call this student Brian. Every classroom has a Brian. If you say, everyone just find a seat, where do you think Brian will end up sitting? Brian knows that the farther he is from you, the more he can get away with. Consequently, he will end up sitting at the back of the class, along with all his buddies. That's where the goof-offs always are. And that is a bad place for those students to be. This situation is not looking good. Your green is showing. The students, they're licking their chops. They're rubbing their hands together thinking, all right, in this first period, we get to kick back. In everything that takes place in your classroom, the students are rating you on your skills of classroom management. And so far, they have not seen much style. They're rating you along the most basic dimensions of leadership ability: proactive versus reactive. What sets proactive teachers apart is not their goals and objectives. Most teachers have those, but rather their procedures. Proactive teachers know how to organize an activity in order to get things done. Reactive teachers either did not know how to organize an activity or are too lazy to go to the trouble. Consequently, they must react to the disaster that has been created by a lack of structure. Our task sometimes seems Herculean, getting a room full of 30 young people to do something quickly and smoothly, and trying to manage one complex activity after another all day long is not for the faint of heart. Getting accustomed to the level of structure, detail, and precision required in the classroom is a big step for a new teacher. Chances are you have never acted or sounded like this before. You've never given yourself permission to be this controlling. That's it for now. In part 2 of How to Succeed on the First Day of Class, we're going to look at how to develop good routines, and we're going to focus specifically on bell work. Now, these routines signal from the beginning that the classroom is both a work environment and a friendly, personal environment as well. Thanks for listening, and see you in part 2.